So, Stephen, you've been involved in the benchmarking for a long period of time with ACODE. So, can you tell us about the need for benchmarking and how the ACODE benchmarks actually came about?
So the ACODE benchmarking approach is one of enabling institutions to have really good internal conversations about quality and to create a culture of self-reflection, critical analysis, and ongoing improvement. And when the benchmarks came into being, there were already alternatives out there, such as Quality on the Line and some of the other tools that were present, but those were seen as having a commercial mandate, perhaps an accountability with a particular agenda, and they didn't translate into the concerns of the ACODE community around ensuring that TEL, Technology Enhanced Learning, really delivered the benefits that our community of users really expected it to be able to achieve. And also we had a real problem in engaging with the leadership of institutions around a trajectory of improvement and what might be options for improving things and what benefits would that result in. And so the initial version of the benchmarks was quite narrowly scoped, and it's gone through several iterations as our awareness of what issues might need to be addressed by the benchmarks has grown, as our understanding of what questions are useful to be asked. But fundamental to the ACODE benchmarks is this idea that there isn't a static reference point or a single measure that accurately captures all of the needs of each university in the particular way that it uses TEL to advance the learning outcomes and the experience of its staff and students. So the tool is very flexible in that it allows people to set for themselves their own level of expectation and to bring a very rich sense of the context they're operating in and the things that might be influencing the choices that they're making at any given time. So those might be strategic priorities, they might be the impact of new technologies, but also, and quite important, through the life of the ACODE benchmarks, we've gone through phases of people really thinking about TEL in terms of online learning and it being an online experience. And then we've had quite a strong engagement with the idea that it might in fact be more about technology being present in a more blended approach. Then, of course, we had the experience of COVID, and that radically reshaped people's understanding of why we did this and what it contributed to the capacity of the organization. And that dramatically changed people's views about the roles of video, for example, and how that affected what an experience of learning might be in different universities. And then, of course, we have moved on to, first of all, have collaborative tools. And so uh, things like Discord and Slack and Teams and Office 365 and our ability to work really well in a collaborative environment with other people has already shifted a sense of what TEL might or might not be. And then, of course, we layer in AI into that and the shift that is now introduced. The important thing being that despite all of those technological changes and those experiences and learning, the questions that we ask remain fundamentally unchanged since that very first version, apart from the expansion into new areas, because we were focused in on how are you achieving this end that is useful in what ways, and is it meeting your belief of it being fit for purpose? Recognizing that if you asked many universities whether they had the right strategy and the right infrastructure and the right training for TEL in 2015, and they gave themselves a 3, if you ask that same question again today, they might give themselves a 3 for completely different reasons. It's not the same thing. It's our expectations evolve, our understanding of what's needed evolve over time.
So, that speaks to the changing and the evolution of the benchmark. So, we've obviously starting benchmark 10, which is accessibility this year. So, you could just talk
Mm.
us through how the benchmarks have in fact changed over the years.
Um, so I think one of the things We see the benchmarks as a collaboration with all of the users of it. So each time that we bring people together through the benchmarking workshops, they have an opportunity to provide feedback on the clarity of the questions. Is the focus correct? Are we overemphasizing some areas rather than others? Also, institutions have the choice of which benchmarks are relevant to their needs. So each year, not everybody does every benchmark. So that's information that's used to reflect on, well, is there really value in having all of these benchmarks? Are they all continuing to add useful information? We have moved information around a little bit in the different versions from version 1 through version 2 to now version 3. We've edited the questions to update the language so that it clarifies the focus, not necessarily changing what we were actually intending to ask people, but using different language so that it's still current and understandable. Right from the beginning, the main set of the 8 covered the sort of primary things that were pretty easy to identify as being important for TEL. So appropriate governance, planning and strategies, the right infrastructure, the use of that, support and professional development and training for staff and for students. But what was clear, and this would be particularly towards the end of the 2010s, is how important the physical experience of TEL was in learning spaces and how complex our understanding of what a really effective learning space was. I think folk would be familiar with some of the earlier publications that have come out of the UK. So JISC, for example, did some really good work highlighting different spaces that were provided. But we felt there was an opportunity to engage into the university community with all of the different stakeholders who are concerned with spaces working really well. And one of the strengths of the ACODE benchmarking approach is that we have a common business need, which is that we provide spaces that are effective for learning and teaching. But it's a shared responsibility. The IT group of the university is responsible for many elements of it. There'll be a campus or properties group that will have a lot of responsibility. There will be the TEL group in terms of how the technology is used in a learning and teaching space. There'll be capability development support, disability support in terms of the usability of that space for a wide range of different users. So bringing those people together to have a conversation about, is this really working for us? Are we creating spaces that are effective for what we need them to be? Not necessarily templated off somebody else's experience of what a campus should be, nor constrained by the history of what physical spaces there are. And it gives that opportunity to have that really great conversation inside the university about what it is that a learning space could be. And more importantly, it builds relationships between those different groups and gives them a context for a really productive conversation and a really positive conversation that isn't simply a user complaint that something's broken, but rather, how satisfied are we with the direction of travel? How do we understand what our priorities might be? And more importantly, it's okay to talk about that as a group of colleagues and even students and people at different levels, and to recognize those different experiences as being equally valid and helping the institution understand its needs going forward. So that particular benchmark was the first of the sort of next generation of benchmarks that we brought in that was very focused into a particular space. And interestingly, that highlighted the sort of coverage piece, because there are elements of that benchmark that were present in some of the others, but only covered by a single question, whereas giving a full benchmark 9 around technology learning spaces, allowed us to really unpack that one area. And that allows an institution to look through the set and make a choice and say, well, yes, we actually really would value a conversation about that. We'll focus in on that one, and perhaps we won't have conversations about a couple of the other more generalized benchmarks this time, because it's a more productive conversation for us. So it helps deal with the problem that many benchmarking instruments have, which is the threshold of getting into them to have a useful experience is quite high. And that prevents people from gaining access to at least some useful information. It's sort of an all or none proposition. The ACODE benchmarks are great in terms of having quite a soft entry point in that respect. And then, of course, most recently, we've now added the Accessible Technology Enhanced Learning benchmark, with a particular focus on making sure that our learning experiences are as inclusive as they can be for wide range of capabilities, and triggering those important conversations that this isn't just about compliance with an external regulatory expectation. This is something that speaks to a good conversation in the university about who our learners are, what their capabilities are, and how we enable people to be present and to be able to learn as well as they are able, without us getting in the way with poorly thought out technologies, poorly thought out implementations of spaces, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's a great segue into stepping through each of the benchmarks. So would you like to just sort of step us through each of the benchmarks? What are their key questions and key focus areas, just to help those who are watching?
Okay, so the benchmarks are structured in a consistent way, and so once you start reading through the benchmarks, most people will understand that will see a structure to them that's consistent from each. In general, they all have a sort of a framing statement at the front, which tells you what it is that they are talking to. So that's the scoping statement, and I'm just scrolling through it. So you have a for benchmark 1, for example, institution-wide policy and governance. The scoping statement tells you that it applies to the institution-level planning, policy implementation in relation to TEL. And it talks about who makes the plans, who's responsible for developing and implementing policy. And that structure carries through into all of the benchmarks. There's then a good practice statement that sort of articulates what doing it well looks like in general terms. And then it's unpacked into a series of performance indicator statements. Each benchmark has between 8 and about 12 performance indicators. Typically, they will follow a common structure, which has something broadly along the lines of what is setting the expectation in the space, so policy, guidelines, strategy, etc. What's the situation with regard to operational delivery of the thing? What's happening with regard to resourcing? What's happening with regard to people's ability to be trained and supported in the specifics? And then finalizing with, how do you know what you know about the space? What are your measures that are present? So most of the benchmarks will follow that structure through the benchmark itself. Each benchmark performance indicator has a very specific statement as to what it is about. And one of the tricks with the benchmarks is to try to just do a plain English read of that sentence and only answer that question. Other questions will unpack other things. And so commonly, sort of an early mistake people do is they try to answer the entire set of benchmarks in the first question, rather than realizing just answer the one and then trust that the others will cover it for you. Each one then has one or more 5-point scales that you answer. So, for example, performance indicator 1.1 around policy and governance. Do you have strategic and operational plans that support and promote the use of TEL? And that 5-point scale goes from no, there are no current plans, through to plans having clear recognition of TEL. And it's the judgment call of the people in the room in your institution, how you rate yourself. Do you think it's a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5? And it's a consensus that should come about through a discussion. Now, you can, and through the process of the benchmarking and attending the workshops, you can reference what you think a 3 is against what other universities think a 3 is. But that's a stimulation to reflect and engage. There's not a correct or incorrect answer here. Your judgment of your being a 3 reflects your sense that that's where you are, and the sense of what can be done that you believe is achievable. And also, the 5 doesn't mean perfect in every achievable way that's possible to imagine for everybody in every way. most of the benchmark measures, 5 is it does the job we need it to do. That's where we are. So it's quite pragmatic. Some of the performance indicators have more than one measure. And so you then average out across those. So some of them have 2 or perhaps 3, and that's allowing you to unpack the specific components of that particular benchmark. So as I say, benchmark 1, institution-wide policy and governance. So do you know why TEL is present in your institution? How is it contributing to success for the institution in a way that can be led and clearly understood by people in the university? Do you have clear priorities? How are you ensuring that those plans are visible to people when decisions are being made? Is the focus of that benchmark. Benchmark 2 looks at the idea that you might implement technology enhanced learning in many institutions, and it's frequently done through projects or similar episodic investment. But how do you plan to make sure that that continues to deliver things that are valued by the institution? What's the processes by which you assess that technology and ensure that its quality is being checked by the organization, that you're getting feedback from users, that you're understanding what it is doing for you and what it's contributing, and that you have mechanisms in place that use that information to lead to some form of improvement. Now, interestingly, it's more than a little meta, that second benchmark, in that going through the ACODE benchmarking process, even in part, is in fact itself evidence that you have in some way a quality and improvement process happening. So many institutions find that a helpful thing to perhaps start with, as well, we've done this and we're thinking about why we do this and how we use that to contribute to our improvement of our quality of TEL. Benchmark 3 comes and looks very specifically at the systems that are used to enact TEL for the university. So this is where often the benchmarking process will really involve a great level of participation from the university IT group. And it's really focused on the technology infrastructure, whether it's locally or cloud-based, whether it's vendor relationships or actually operated and developed locally. And it asks you to assess how well that is enacted operationally. So the third benchmark is very much an operational benchmark for people interested in ensuring that the basics of the infrastructure, however that's conceived, are delivered well and meet the needs of the institution and its users. So there's interestingly, a lot of overlap here with some of the support benchmarks, because a certain number of the questions here are specifically around how is support of that infrastructure enacted. So again, you can make a decision. You might choose to focus very much here on the technology infrastructure and do a little bit of support, or you might choose to do the support benchmarks and not worry so much about the IT infrastructure, or you can do both, and then there'll be a lot of cross-referencing between your answers in those two different benchmarks. Moving on to benchmark 4, this is technology enhanced learning we're benchmarking, so we need to see that it enhances learning, and this benchmark is the benchmark that says, really, how is that happening? How is it that these technologies translate into learning and teaching experiences and benefits that are valued by the institution? So here, this is where questions are asked about how does the choices of technology and the application of technology and its capabilities relate to the aspirations and vision of your learning and teaching strategy, and by implication, the awareness of the diversity of your students, the contexts of learning, the modes of delivery, and the forms of learning that are wanted. There's specific questions about the pedagogical intent and how it's applied, the TEL resources and activities and materials. How do they relate to the capacity to enact an effective pedagogy and be supported by your teachers and experienced well by the learners? Moving on, the benchmark 5 is the first of a match set. So 5 and 6 relate to the staff support experience for TEL. Benchmark 5 looks at how well professional development is enacted, so what's being done proactively to ensure that staff are well prepared to use technologies in their learning and that they have the appropriate information to prepare themselves for that. Benchmark 6 is how do you then support those people as they translate that learning into action? So the sort of two sides of the full support experience for a staff member in the university. And so Benchmark 6 looks at the availability of support. How is that support being scoped to ensure that it's sufficient? How is it being evaluated to make sure that people are using what they need of it? How is it coordinated across a wide variety of participants in the support experience? And again, this is one of the 5 and 6 particularly are great benchmarks for bringing together colleagues from the library, from the IT group, from your academic development group, from your e-learning group, and HR potentially, and even some of the managers and leaders of the academic work of the university. So it's a great mechanism to bring together people who might not necessarily spend a lot of time in the same room together talking about how well things come together for the institution. Moving on to 7 and 8, these benchmarks do the same thing but for students. And I think it's a fair thing to say that the typical experience over the last decade or more of the benchmarks has been a certain amount of embarrassment about how badly we rate ourselves, particularly in the student area. And I think it's important to recognize that the benchmarking exercise is not intended to only celebrate great success. It is important that it be an honest assessment of expectations and assessments of the qualities of the thing in order to help people reflect on whether they can do more, what could be done, is it important that it be done? And realistically, any of this work in the TEL space is an exercise in priorities and trying to manage what can be done as opposed to what we might imagine is in a perfect world. So it's an opportunity to highlight in this space, for example, how challenging it can be to engage with a large population of students with a diverse set of needs and diverse set of skills meaningfully. And I think one of the lessons of the benchmarks in these spaces has been how hard it is to really do that. And this has been where we've had some very interesting conversations about the value and utility of 24/7 support lines, for example. Reality is actually you can get almost as much value from something like a 16/7 because there is a down period in the middle of the night in which you really don't need to be instantly available to support people. So it's quite pragmatic, some of the conversations that go on here and what is used to assess whether these things are really meeting people's needs. The other thing that's really critical for this, particularly for the staff and the student support benchmarks, is that they are in relation to the aspirations and expectations of what type of TEL is present in the learning experience and to what extent and in what way. So an institution that is heavily invested into remote delivery and the use of technology in the student experience, its level of expectation of support and training will be very different to a more traditionally framed in-person campus research university, where the use of technology is seen much more as secondary to the in-person presence in a teaching environment. And then, but both the universities might rate themselves very similarly. It's that what they have is meeting their need as their need is, not a directly comparable thing. And that then takes us to the first of the more recent benchmarks, which is benchmark 9, which looks at technology learning spaces. And this one is interesting because it covers a wide range of things anchored specifically into the physical learning environment and what that means in terms of providing facilities that are effective for learning and teaching. Interestingly, this one also includes quite a clear out of scope statement, which is to say that it is not about the wider amenities of the campus. It's not about the quality of the paintwork or the artistic ambience of it. It is very focused in on the features of a physical learning environment that are intended to enable learning to take place and to support people making that happen. So you have questions about, do you have the right size and configuration of spaces to match the range of learning that's happening? There's a single question about whether those spaces are accessible and inclusive. Obviously, if you're doing the next benchmark 10, you'll unpack that quite a lot more, but it's acknowledged as at least being an issue. I will also acknowledge at this point, rather late to the set of the benchmarks was this awareness that we did have to start asking that hard question about accessibility and inclusion. We possibly can be wrapped over the knuckles for not picking that up a little bit earlier, but it's an example of how, as a sector internationally, we become aware of things and then take the opportunity to collectively engage with that in a positive way. And that is not to say that, for example, in some of the earlier benchmarks, that we haven't had good conversations about whether or not they were accessible, whether they were meeting the needs of the full diversity of learners that a particular institution would have. It's just that we didn't pull that out as a specific thing and ask people to consciously examine that. So the rest of the learning spaces ensure that they're fit for purpose, that they have the right support in place, that the right resources are there for both staff and for students, and that there is an awareness of how those things are improved and sustained over time to continue to be useful as expectations and needs change. And then lastly, our latest one as of this year is the exciting Accessible Technology Enhanced Learning benchmark. And again, like the Learning Spaces benchmark, it goes through the full scope of what this means for TEL in a university. Are there mechanisms to ensure the appropriate governance? In this case, we've also really strongly emphasized how important it is that oversight of what is done here is well informed and led by, as much as possible, people with lived experiences of different needs, and to ensure that there is an authentic response to that and that those things are prioritized well and not seen at a distance by people who perhaps are not directly embedded into that space. There's an expectation of a strategy, and this flows through from all the benchmarks, appropriate resourcing, operational mechanisms that translate those things into real things that people can touch and use and take advantage of. An important element that was highlighted in this last benchmark was the full life cycle of this as it affects TEL, right from the point of procurement through operations, through to use pedagogically, and then through to its ongoing maintenance and improvement. So right from the beginning, that this is identified as something that people need to pay attention to. Obviously, staff and student support and recognition of people's capability improvements and making sure that those things take place. There is a very blunt measure performance indicator in this last one that basically says, are in fact the spaces accessible? Do they in fact provide the appropriate sensory and physical affordances that are needed to meet people's needs? But even there, that's an interesting one where historically we perhaps would have focused on, can you in fact get a wheelchair into the room? Is the furniture appropriate to people with different physical needs? We possibly wouldn't have paid attention to the color of the light or the particular color palette on the walls or the acoustic properties, other than in terms of their clarity for people listening to them, or perhaps the use of deaf hearing aid loops. Now we have a greater awareness of neurodiversity and a greater awareness of a wide range of sensory features that contribute to people's comfort and capacity to use a space well. So again, our expectations have shifted quite significantly. as with a number of the benchmarks, there's a focus on collecting information and ensuring that that's also used for improvement. So yeah, that's the coverage of the benchmarks and the structure. And I think it's really important to, again, to emphasize you can have a really good benchmarking experience by perhaps choosing one benchmark or perhaps two or three that are really relevant. It's not at all implied in any part of this process that you do all of the benchmarks, and that would certainly be a valuable exercise, but one that would require quite a lot of resource and support from your institution, particularly if people have not had a previous experience of being involved in quality conversations, in being involved in critiquing and improving things in a formalized way. And perhaps, particularly if institutions have only ever experienced an audit type of benchmark with an accountability agenda, the mindset of the ACODE benchmarks, which is this collegiality, this common engagement, and this opportunity to learn from each other and improve, it's quite a different experience, and then one that is experienced also differently in that we then take those internal conversations and have a really good sector conversation in the ACODE workshop, where in a very careful and appropriately confidential way, we share our thinking about these things with each other, recognizing that in many cases, different universities are looking for options to consider and different ways in which things can be achieved, and perhaps partners and collaborators or opportunities to build networks and share how to solve common problems. For example, as I mentioned before with the student support and training one, that's commonly experienced across the sector. So the idea that we try to all solve that individually, obviously there's great opportunity instead to get into a room with our peers and to use the collective acknowledgement that we have a collective problem as a stimulus for us to work collectively to try and find solutions that we can either collectively contribute to or at least collectively reflect on.
Thanks, Stephen. So I've got one final question before we get some ideas from others who are going to be attending the benchmarking. And that is really if you have any tips for anyone who's new to benchmarking in terms of how to make it a successful event for them.
So I think it's really important to try to get as many people as possible into the room with you. I think it's one of these things which you could take the benchmark set, and a suitably aware senior staff member could probably sit down and complete the whole benchmark set from their perspective in an afternoon. There's not that many questions. That would lose so much of what the benchmarks can do for an institution. So I would look for, first of all, I would socialize it with senior leaders. So I would help them understand the nature of the type of process that's involved here, that it's not a quality marketing exercise, that it's not an accountability exercise, that it is an opportunity to build a culture of improvement and reflection. And then I would suggest to pick a benchmark that had an alliance to an important priority or need for the institution that was already acknowledged, and to look for where there is a way to use that accepted need and priority as a mechanism to engage broadly in the institution. And then I would be looking to bring together, and this doesn't have to be a really a great daunting exercise, pull people together for an hour and a half in a room together with the focus point being, let's have a conversation about this need that we have as an institution. And try to open that up as widely as possible, because one of the lessons of the benchmarks is that the viewpoint of each academic, of each professional staff member within the university, with your students, with leaders at different levels, those are all equally valid perspectives on the nature of a thing. It's not an exercise of patch protection and defensive behavior from particular service providers. It's really an opportunity for them to hear authentically from their colleagues, yes, it's great, we understand the limitations, but it'd be really nice if you could do X, or we really are enjoying it, but we only experience it this way. We'd love to be able to experience it that way, for example. Or have you heard of this great idea that we'd love to be able to achieve if it were possible? So it's opening up the possibility for those conversations that is the real thing to try and achieve. And then you can do a lot with a SharePoint site locally and a few Word documents and get people to just jump in and do some shared editing of, I think it's a 3 and somebody else, and this is why, and somebody else can come in and say, well, I think it's a 2 and this is why. And yes, it's all anecdotes, and yes, it's impressions and views, but that's the nature of the evidence that's used for the benchmarking. It's not someone getting out with a pair of calipers and really physically measuring something, because that's not the nature of what we do.
Great, thanks. So it really reinforces it's a conversation, collaborative conversation, rather than a formal exam, effectively. So
exactly,
yeah, coming into that is great. So thanks, Stephen. What I'm going to do is ask Steve Leichtweis, who should appear. So Steve, if you want to come online for us and just talk us through how you're going to be using it at the University of Auckland, Steve.
Thanks, Kate. A good question. Obviously, as a university, we've been involved in the benchmarking process since 2016. We don't do all of the benchmarks. We do a subset of them, and I think, as you'll probably see from Stephen's comments and his video responses, we focus on stuff that's really relevant to the unit that we work in, and where we have connections with other units or divisions in the university, we will bring them in and focus on like learning spaces, which has a big overlap with our remit, or with digital services, which has a big overlap with our remit, our team's remit within the University of Auckland. My approach is to try and get about a dozen staff from across the university involved. And I also like to co-facilitate these. I don't like to be primarily in charge. And so if it is with learning spaces, I now have really good connection with our property services unit. They love the outcome of these kinds of conversations. It helps them build better buildings and retrofit better classroom spaces. But I look for a variety of people, and that can include students. It can include people who are professional staff in various roles, and it can include academics. Definitely academics are an important voice to include in this. And I also look for folks who sit in different places in the university as well. That could be somebody entirely new to working at the university. They bring a set of eyes and potentially experiences from other institutions with them. And they can ask really insightful questions about, why are we doing it this way? And you're like, yeah, why are we doing it this way? We also have people who are involved in more of the decision making, because there will be experiences or understandings around how the university works, or things that are possible or not possible because of the nature of the role that they play. And yeah, the most interesting aspect of this, they all go off, they do their independent reviews, but it's that consensus meeting. You bring all of those different voices and those different perspectives back into a consensus making meeting, and people learn a lot through that process just internally. And it really does help provide the folks who are involved a lot of detail and a lot of nuance in the value of the benchmarks, and the recognition of where there are gaps and opportunities for the university or your unit that is responsible to continually improve against those benchmarks. I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but hopefully so.
You did. Look, and finally, I'll bring Patrick on. So Patrick is University of Melbourne, who are hosting this year's benchmark, or the 2026 benchmark, if you're looking at this from a future year. And so, Patrick, if you just want to talk us through how the University of Melbourne has used it previously, and then what we can expect from a benchmarking summit?
Thanks, Kate. So yes, at the University of Melbourne, we've done it for a number of years now. I think importantly, we've actually kept it all together. So as a couple of the other unis mentioned, bringing it together in a collaboration space. We've got all of our ACODE benchmarking records in a unified wiki space in our Confluence. And so every biannual period it's there of what benchmarks we answered. And we find we collect a huge amount of information internally that so we collect all of this information for ourselves, for our own purposes of, gee, we want to actually fix that, or that's an area we should be looking at. And then we summarize that to share at the ACODE benchmarks because there's so much there. But we're sort of a bit of an iceberg for us. So there's all that information and we collect ourselves and keep in the wiki. And that's enabled us to build each benchmarking session on session to go, what did we say last time? What did we say this time before that? And I think as Stephen mentioned in one of his intros, the concept of watching how the rationale for a score can change over the years, even though the score looks stable, the rationale is absolutely transformative. Something we also do is we place different team leaders responsible. So whoever's got the responsible unit takes charge of conducting and leading the benchmark for that area. So for ourselves, our head of learning designers is looking after the staff training and staff support. The head of operations is looking after the policy questions and the ops. We have our new accessibility ed techs and learning designers will be doing the new benchmark 10. So we're very excited about that. They can't wait to get stuck in. And our academic skills unit will be doing the student support area. And they come with very different lenses, which is it's really a nice part of how the benchmarks are different and differentiated into their individual questions because it does allow the teams with that subject matter expertise to really drill down, not get lost in nuances of other questions. They can really get into the weeds of that particular question. And that's where it serves us best historically, is it allows quite a good touch point. Biannual means it's not too frequent. Organizational change has had a chance to take place, and trying to see if we're driving forward. And I think, as Stephen importantly said, we use it as an opportunity to be really honest with ourselves. As Stephen said, it's not a marketing opportunity. This is an opportunity to go, where can we improve? Where are we falling short? Where have we not identified something previously? So that's the benefit for us in terms of the benchmarking exercise in and of itself. In terms of running the benchmarking summit for 2026, it will be a hybrid event, but we really encourage people to try and send a delegate or two down to us in Melbourne because the conversations around what we have is that's really the benefit here of the benchmarking. I mean, there's the value of doing this ourselves and exploring the questions ourselves, but it's the comparative analysis across us. I mean, that's the benchmarking bit. And it's to gain the insights into what some of us are doing better in some areas. What are we doing unique? What are we doing that could be shared? Even just the awareness of unique approaches from some of us, even if we can't replicate it, it still informs your own institutional thinking of what you can do in context and at scale and scope that makes sense locally. So we're definitely looking at this year, I mean, Gen AI as in all things. So previously with the benchmarking summits, we've sort of gone through what everyone has said about a particular benchmark. And I think those of you who have participated before would know we kind of start to get into the dittos after a few institutions have reported back. So we're thinking this year we'll be using AI to help us summarize everyone's feedback. It'll be in a safe AI, of course, as part of, and it'll be ACODE's licensed AI to make sure we've got all the safeties there. And it'll be looking at what are the commonalities, what are the differentiators, so that way we can actually really explore those aspects of the different benchmarks rather than losing a fair bit of our time on just sort of a report back. The tool has all that information that we've all shared with one another that we can all do some homework and read. So let's use our time at the summit to actually get into it and really talk about unique elements, the differentiating elements, and what can be shared. And that's really it. And to go away with having a concept of how we're all doing across the sector, and then how we can implement the targets or what we've identified as fantastic ideas back home.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Looking forward to it. So thanks everybody for contributing, and hopefully this session has been really useful as you think about how you're going to be involved with benchmarking with ACODE for 2026 and beyond.